The legacy media is struggling in a way that we've just never seen before. And it all comes back to the ancient principles of journalism, cornerstones that the industry have followed for the last century like lemmings for absolutely no reason. The basic codes and canons, standards that must always be followed. If you want to be considered a real journalist, you must be objective and impartial, and your audience can never know your politics. They can never know how you vote or sense any bias in your reporting, which at this point sounds completely ridiculous, doesn't it? All of that might have been fine before TV, before the internet, when we all lived in silos. But today, people want the real thing. They want authenticity. And to prove that, I'm going to tell you something that you probably already know. I've never said this before on television, though. I voted for Donald Trump in November. I did so for a number of reasons, but I voted for Donald Trump, and I don't think that changes our relationship at all. If anything, I think you probably, on some level, appreciate the honesty. And knowing that, you know where I am when I look at the news. I am to the right, yes. But does that mean I can't be a journalist? I actually think people would enjoy the New York Times a little bit more if the first sentence of a Peter Baker story read, "I voted for Kamala Harris." And I think that's part of the reason why the independent media is doing so well right now. Media that literally didn't exist 5 or 10 years ago is now more powerful than the legacy media that's been around for a century.
I think the most serious thing I've heard about him has been the E. Jean Carroll allegation that he sexually assaulted her in a Bergdorf dressing room. And I don't believe one word of that.
There's
Not
many.
one word.
There are other women who have
Oh,
said.
I know. I've interviewed some of them. My problem is more with these Democrats who will bury these allegations against their candidates or their candidate spouses and then play holier than thou when they're looking at Donald Trump.
Authenticity. What I like about authenticity is that you cannot fake it. You can't learn it at some fancy journalism school. You've either got it or you don't. When I was first starting out in this business 20 years ago in my very first newsroom, there I am, I worked on a morning show, and I can remember some of the reporters, these crusty, kind of unfriendly people, sort of looked down on people in morning TV with this almost, "that's not real journalism" attitude. We are the real journalists here working at night. And that always stuck with me. That always bothered me because it made no sense. Why are you any more a journalist than I am? I report the news, and frankly, I make and break a lot more news than you ever have. Carol was her name. I won't say the last name. So why can't I be a journalist too, Carol? If Peter Baker admitted to being a liberal who voted for Kamala Harris, I'd respect him more. I'd probably read him more. But this whole thing that CNN is trying to do right now, and MSNBC, and ABC, and CBS, and NBC, and the New York Times, it's not working because people at home can see right through all of it. And they know that most of these people are Democrats. So why not just be open with your audience about it from the start? Why do you think Megyn Kelly's doing so well? Why do you think Tucker's doing so well? Newsmax essentially didn't exist on cable 5 years ago. We just IPO'd yesterday, and today we're worth more than Fox. You can write off one of those examples, but you can't write us all off. I'm a journalist. I went to Syracuse, where I learned how to become a real journalist. You're not a journalist. You're an idiot. You're a liar. Remember this? Just last week, the CEO of NPR told the world that NPR isn't biased.
Is NPR biased?
Congressman, I have never seen any instance of political bias determining editorial decisions. No.
87 registered Democrats, 0 Republicans. Is that accurate?
We do not track the numbers or the voter registration, but I find that
Was award-winning journalist who worked 25 years at NPR, Mr. Berliner, was he lying when he wrote that?
I am not presuming such.
That was last week, wasn't 20 years ago. Can you imagine if that woman right there, the CEO of NPR, just came out and confirmed what we all know already, that NPR is definitely biased. They are Democrats who cater to Democrats. Why not just admit it? And that brings us to the White House Correspondents' Dinner, the annual dinner in Washington. I've been to it. Most people would say, oh, it's all nerds. It's nerd prom. Look, it used to be something at one point. This is something that journalists go to, real journalists. The current president of the White House Correspondents Association, the president, the head guy, tell me if by watching what this gentleman says, you might sense just a little bit bias from this journalist.
he has a hard time running against Vice President Harris because she's a black woman. You will remember, Ashley, when he would tussle with the women that would ask him questions, our colleagues on the White House beat. Reporters. You know, he held his kind of most angry self for black women, right? If they asked him a question, he would have the worst things to say about them. And so you're seeing that, right?
I can think of three off the top of my head.
Right off the top of our head. And when he talked about Joe Biden got worse, Harris was born like that, right? That's different. That's a dog whistle to folks to say, you know, the white guy just got older and it got worse, but the black lady was born dumb. That is the kind of thing that Donald Trump is saying and selling to folks.
Okay, so that's Eugene Daniels, and he seems like a well-adjusted fellow to me. I don't know what you're talking about, but here are a couple photos that Eugene shared not long ago on his social media pages. Again, Eugene seems like he's a well-adjusted fellow, the perfect guy to be running the White House Correspondents Association. Nothing odd to see here. That's not a little strange. It wasn't even Halloween, certainly not on that day. There's too many leaves on those trees. Halloween's in the fall. He also just got hired by MSNBC, but Eugene is a real journalist. No bias there, not even a hint of bias. No way to tell who he voted for. He didn't vote for Kamala. He voted for Donald Trump. What are you talking about? Anyway, Eugene Daniels just decided to cancel the comedian that he booked to host the Correspondents' Dinner later this month, stating that, quote, "At this consequential moment for journalism, I want to ensure the focus is not on the politics of division, but entirely on awarding our colleagues for their outstanding work in mentorship to the next generation of journalists." I can imagine that people might think maybe this woman might be a little bit biased, but this is the woman they chose to host their journalism dinner. Again, not a hint of bias here. She actually might be a Trump voter, too. Take a look.
I don't know that anyone's looking forward to being in the same room as him.
So
You know what I mean?
I'm not 100% interested in being like, ha, you're here. Look at your stupid head. You're burned. You're kind of a bunch of murderers. I mean, so like they were like, you need to be, you know, equal and make sure that that you give it to both sides and blah, blah, blah. I was like, there's no way I'm going to be freaking doing that, dude.
So as a result of all of this, all the bias, the decades of bias from people who pretend to be journalists, Caroline Leavitt just did something that I expected her to do on day one. All of those legacy media seats that have been in the front row in the briefing room for decades are now being moved to the back and being replaced with real journalists. Reuters is being moved to the back. The Associated Press going to the back. CNN moving. NBC, CBS going to the back. The New York Times and Peter Baker moving to the back. NPR is moving to the back. They can still ask questions. They can still raise their hands. They can still do everything they've always done. Just now, they're going to be a few rows back. But these legacy media outlets got so comfortable in the front row. I just found this out today. They actually had their names on their seats in the briefing room. Can you imagine doing that? The arrogance of doing that in the people's room. It's not their seat, it's your seat. Members of Congress don't even have their names on their seats on Capitol Hill. That's how lost these journalists all are. And they are going to the back. Do you want to see an example of bias in the media that just happened? Lesley Stahl this weekend in a split-second exchange with a man who was held hostage by Hamas for over a year. Take a look.
The terrorists became very mean and very cruel and violent.
More so.
Much more so. They were beating me and starving me.
Do you think they starved you or they just didn't have food?
No, I think they starved me, and they would often eat in front of me and not offer me food.
Do you think they starved you or they just didn't have food? That's what Lesley Stahl asked a guy who's been in Hamas captivity for a year. Yeah, Lesley, I'm sure the Hamas terrorists were starving too. Otherwise, they would have happily shared their goldfish with the same people they've been raping and murdering for the last year. The bias is everywhere at this point. The agenda of all of these people completely transparent, but they all still claim to be right down the middle. We're talking about Lesley Stahl, a real journalist. Just like Jasmine Crockett claims to care about the people of Texas. My goodness, have you heard this?
If we continue to put people into office, and that even means some of our skinfolk who definitely are not our kinfolk, such as Byron Donalds, who are going to continue to say, that, like, I mean, the fact that you sitting around talking about life was better under Jim Crow, like, is this because you don't understand history? Or literally it's because you married a white woman and so you think that whitewashed you? I'm not really sure, like, what it is.
Well,
but
you
I
couldn't
need
even be married to a white woman under Jim
correct,
Crow.
correct. And it took Joy to call him out. So I'm like, bruh, like, what are you talking about? Like, what are you saying? Like, he just out here, you know, I feel like they give him his talking points and he's like, yes, massa, I got it.
Okay. Jasmine Crockett apparently upset that her black Republican colleague in Congress, Byron Donalds, is married to a white woman. Again, that's a Democrat saying that. Never mind that AOC is married to a white guy named Riley Roberts. Or that Lizzie Warren of Massachusetts didn't end up marrying another Indian. She married a white guy named Bruce Mann. And what about Kamala Harris? Well, Kamala married a white guy too. His name's Doug Emhoff, and he knocked up his nanny, and she didn't win in November. And what about Ketanji Brown Jackson? She doesn't know what a woman is, but she had no problem marrying another white guy named Patrick Johnson. And what about Ilhan Omar? Well, a lot to this story, but now her husband's name, Tim Manette. And what about the mayor of Boston that we've talked about so much lately, Michelle Wu? She married a white guy named Connor Pewarski. But why didn't Jasmine Crockett mention any of that? Why not? People are sick of the double standard, and they are sick of the people who claim to be journalists, covering for people like that every day. They are sick of it, and now because of independent media, they're able to see right through it. They probably always did, meaning all of these journalists have finally been exposed.
Information. Truth is freedom. Is Newsmax. It's real news for real people.